Head Start funding! 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 Head Start funding!
My name is and I am with SCIU and also Head Start Early Head Start CFDP program. And why I'm here today is to advocate for our program so that we can stay open, we can stay funded. We have many children, many families that we serve a good cause, and we just want to keep that going in our community. They depend on us, they rely on us, and it's worth fighting for, and that's what we're here today, to prove that we are worth fighting for, and we need that support, and that's why we're here today, to get that support from all of it, everybody in the community. So.
Welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Amanda Harris-Altice. I am one of the lead organizers for Indivisible Santa Cruz County. And we are co-hosting this event today with Indivisible Pajaro Valley, and also our Santa Cruz County Democratic Party. So thank you to both of those groups for being in the celebration with us. We're thrilled to have you here today for today's town hall with Representatives Jimmy Panetta and Zoe Lofgren. A big thanks to our moderator as well, former Santa Cruz Mayor Hilary Bryant. Thank you for leading this important conversation. We appreciate that. I want to go over how today's flow is going to be. We'll begin with opening remarks from our moderator, Mayor Bryant, and our representatives, followed by questions that have been submitted by community members during registration. These questions have been carefully edited for clarity while preserving their intent. We won't be taking live audience questions, but we encourage everyone to follow up directly with your representatives' offices after today's event. Since we have a limited time today, we want to be able to highlight the most important questions that we received and get through several of those. So that's why we've structured the event that way today. We're here because we care deeply about our communities and our future. While we appreciate the work of our representatives have done, we also know there's more to do. Our questions today reflect the urgency and commitment of people who expect bold leadership in extraordinary times. We also want to recognize any local officials here today. I'm not sure that I saw any other local elected officials, and I apologize if I'm missing any local officials. But again, want to recognize we have here with us Democratic Central Committee Chair Jenny Beach Olson is here, and we also have and also a shout out to the SCIU Head Start who I just met right before the event started, so thank you. Okay, and before I pass the mic, Indivisible Santa Cruz County, Indivisible Pajaro Valley, Monterey, Salinas, Aramis, and Boulder Creek invite you to stand with us next Saturday, October 18th for No King's Day. More than 2,500 events across the country in all 50 states and around the world. So join ISCC and join us in San Lorenzo Park at 10 a.m. or here in Watsonville at the Watsonville Plaza up the street at noon, where lifelong activist Dolores Huerta will be speaking. For more details about the other events that I didn't mention the specific times for, and more information. And with that, I will turn it over to Mayor Hilary Bryant.
Good morning, welcome, and thank you to Indivisible for hosting us this morning, and thank you to all of you for being here. What I truly love about our community is it's a beautiful day in Santa Cruz County, open studios are happening, you could be doing a lot of other things, and yet you're here during these challenging times to engage with your representatives. So thank you for making time. It's my great honor. I'm gonna follow instructions and take the mic and go sit down. It is my honor to be here today with all of you. And we're going to start with opening comments from each of the representatives. We'll start with Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, who is a long-time public servant. She is the daughter of a truck driver and a cook and has given her life to public service, starting at the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara, all the way up to a ranking member of Congress. And she's also the proud grandmother of 3 grandchildren and 2 daughters, or 2 children. And with that, I will welcome opening remarks from Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren.
There you go.
Okay, this is working. First, let me thank you for inviting Jimmy and me to be here today, and thank you for your active participation in our democracy and efforts to try and save our democracy from the forces of right-wing oppression. You know, yesterday, Speaker Johnson canceled votes again for next week. And a lot of people are talking about the government shutdown. I think it's important to touch just briefly on the position that we have taken, why we've taken it, and the path forward that we see. Earlier this year, on a strictly partisan basis in the House, massive cuts were made to basic needs programs. Cuts to the Medicaid program that will put millions of people out of their health care insurance, and a refusal to extend tax credits for the Affordable Care Act covered California here, which will result in thousands and thousands of dollars of increase in premiums, as well as some of the other really unconscionable things that we have seen. House Democrats weren't for that earlier this year, and we're still not for that. And what we have said is we've got to reverse some of these unconscionable health care cuts if we are to proceed. I'll take just a couple of examples. In the 18th district alone, the experts predict that 21,000 people will lose their health care insurance. That for a 60-year-old couple earning less than the median income, their annual premiums will go up more than $26,000 a year. It's not sustainable. So that's what this is about. I just want to say some of the other things that I'm working on. I don't want to talk too long because I want more questions. But I'm the senior Democrat on the House Science Committee. That's called ranking member. And that is one of the last bipartisan committees on the Hill, and we have worked together. But the problem is the administration has taken a hatchet to science in this country, from cutting grants for research into cancer cures or Alzheimer's, cutting basic research, doing just screwy things. They are really impairing our future by the cuts in science. We have stood up to that, but we are not able to stop them because Democrats do not have a majority in the House, and although my Republican members on the committee will work with me, they're not willing to stand up to the administration when it comes to actually fighting back. I want to talk just a little bit about our electoral system. I'm sure you all noticed when Trump called the governor of Texas and said he wanted 5 Republican seats. One of the things my day job allows me to do is to chair the California Democratic delegation, and we meet every week, the Democrats. And we said, what are we going to do about this, or are we going to do anything? We had a choice, do nothing or do something. And we decided we should do something. And so working with our governor, working with our Speaker of the Assembly, Rob Rivas, who did a terrific job, as well as the Senate, we came up with a plan that would counter what Texas did. And frankly, we thought if we just tell them that, maybe they'll back off, because we actually like independent redistricting. We've always supported that. Well, instead of backing off, they doubled down. They've not only done Texas, now they've gone to Missouri, they're going to other states. And so we proceeded. You have a choice to make November 4th. Ballots are already arriving. You can do something or do nothing. And if you vote yes on 50, you're doing something. It'll give us a Now, I'll just say I'm going to be at a No Kings Day event next week in San Jose. And I look forward to seeing the thousands and thousands of Americans who are willing to stand up against the kind of outrageous behavior we've seen from this administration, from masked armed ICE agents attacking viciously and sometimes violently innocent people on the street, to threatening to send the military into states. This is really out of hand, and it's time for all of us Americans to stand up and say no. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lofgren. I'm actually going to a sign decorating party with a bunch of middle school students tomorrow, so I'm very excited about that. Thank goodness for youth and for science. It's now my honor to introduce Congressman Jimmy Panetta. He's got deep roots here on the Central Coast, has been serving our community since 2016, and he and his wife Carrie have raised two amazing daughters who actually went to the same public schools that he went to, and I'm sure gave you a run for your money. And with that, it's my honor to introduce Congressman Panetta for his opening comments.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Hilary, and obviously thanks to Indivisible, and of course, thanks to my neighbor to the north and east, as well as my mentor, someone who really is a champion and has been a champion and continues to be a champion for all of us on the Central Coast, and that's Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. Look, I think Zoe made a good point. You guys could be doing a lot of other things right now on a beautiful Saturday morning, but the fact that you chose to be here to engage, not just with us, but to engage in our democracy says a heck of a lot about you, says a heck of a lot about Indivisible, so please know how much I appreciate you being here to do this and take part in this town hall. But also, not just in the past, and not just next week at the No Kings rally, which I'll be at as well, but thank you for engaging in the fight. Thank you for engaging in the fight. We are in a fight right now. We are in a fight during the shutdown. We are in a fight during this redistricting. We're in a fight to push back on restoring our health care. We're in a fight to reduce high prices. We're in a fight for our democracy. Let's make that clear. Now look, we are in this position right now, and we're actually here this weekend and this week because of the Republican refusal to do anything when it comes to negotiating on our health care and keeping the government open. It's the Republican refusal to negotiate on this continuing resolution is exactly why the government shut down. Let's make it clear. The Republicans are in charge of the House, of the Senate, and there's an alleged Republican in the White House right now. If they wanted to keep the government open, they could keep it open. But instead, they chose to shut it down because they chose to shove through a purely partisan, non-negotiated continuing resolution. So absolutely we're going to vote no on that, as Zoe and I did, and every Democrat except one did. I say that because despite them saying it's a clean CR, look, in my limited time in Congress, I've had 29 continuing resolutions. I'm not proud that we've had to have continuing resolutions for our budget. But one of the things that we were able to do is come together and negotiate before the continuing resolution. That's not what Speaker Johnson did when he shoved it through the House, and that's not what John Thune did when he tried to shove it through the Senate. They need to negotiate in the Senate. They need 7 Democratic senators, and they're not doing that because let me tell you, we got a lot to negotiate when it comes to our health care. As you heard from Zoe, as you know well, they passed a bill, a purely partisan Republican bill, that cuts health care for the most vulnerable in our country. Not just on the Central Coast, but throughout California and throughout the United States. Now look, when it comes to Medicaid, they made changes to that program in the OBBB. I can't even say the name, the worst named bill in the history of Congress. So the OBBB made changes to Medicaid that will cut people by 14 million people in the United States. On the Affordable Care Act, something that we were able to double with our votes in the American Rescue Plan, they are going to make changes to the Affordable Care Act that will kick off 4 million people on the ACA, and prices of the tax credits, the premiums that they're going to have to pay for healthcare, is going to double for over 20 million. So absolutely, we're going to push back. Now they say, well, we should just enter into the CR and then we're going to negotiate. How do we expect, look, when you have negotiations, it's based on trust. How can we trust these Republicans when they've implemented a bill that did the cuts that I talked about, when they've had impoundments, and when they've had rescissions on deals that we've made? This is what we're dealing with. This is exactly why we won't agree to negotiate. We need to negotiate now to open up the government to restore health care. That's how we do it. We're going to fight on the shutdown. We're going to fight on health care. We're going to fight on affordability, especially right here in the 19th Congressional District. But one of the main reasons why prices are going up is because of what the Republicans did in the OBBB. In that bill, health care prices are going to go up. Energy prices are going to go up. Housing prices are going to go up because interest rates are going to go up because it added $3.4 trillion to our national debt. Their deportation policy obviously prevents and scares the hell out of all of us, but it scares people from showing up to work, so prices of small businesses are going up. And then this 40-year fetish that the president has with tariffs, that's causing prices in grocery stores and everyday prices to go up as well. So we're working hard to push back on them to make sure that we do have these reasonable negotiations so that we can reduce these prices. And when it comes to saving our democracy, this is a threat to the future of where we can go. And we're seeing it because we got a president who's sending in the troops to these cities. He's shifting his loyalists into the DOJ to weaponize the DOJ. He's slapping tariffs on everyday products. He's scaring people, universities, small businesses, television companies into submission. And he's basically slashing healthcare prices. Look, we've continued to fight back on this president through legislation, through investigation, through litigation, through communication. But it's the last one, motivation, is what we're going to need the most. And that's what comes from all of you. Look, please know, and thank God, democracy is not about Washington, D.C. Democracy is what we see in this room here. Democracy is what we see in our community. Democracy is what we're going to see next weekend at the No Kings rally. So please know how much I appreciate you being here today, but also being in the fight together as we go forward. Thank you.
And I'm going to read right from this because these are your questions, and I want to be sure to capture the questions appropriately. Representatives, your constituents acknowledge that the work that you're both doing during these unprecedented times and difficult times. You've both taken bold actions in many arenas to uphold the Constitution and our democracy. The following is questions for both of you, and we'll start with Representative Lofgren. Many of your constituents, including a recently fired USAID diplomat with 28 years of experience, have been personally impacted by the current administration's actions to fire federal workers, defund agencies and programs such as Medicaid, SNAP, Planned Parenthood, and many others. This is not in accordance with Congress's authority to appropriate funds. Can each of you briefly provide highlights of specific actions you are taking to address the situation and tell us how your constituents can best support you in these efforts?
Great question. Let me just say that, as Jimmy has said, the Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House. So unless we can talk a Republican or two into voting with us, which we have not been successful in for the most part, we don't have the votes to defeat them in the House. That's just the facts. So what can we do? A couple of things. First, much of what has been defunded is, in my view, illegal. We have 3 branches of government, and so what the House Democrats did was to organize a litigation task force. I'm part of that litigation task force. We are in touch with all of the Democratic attorney generals in the United States who talk basically every day so that we can coordinate the litigation to stop the illegal behavior. And I will say we've had remarkable success. Hundreds of lawsuits have been filed. Most of them have been successful. Some of them have been stayed at the appellate level, but it's a winning streak for our side. The other thing we can do is to highlight the just stupidity of some of what's happening. For example, there was illegal firings of ag scientists, including a person who was, he's got a PhD, he was here in the Salinas Valley, and illegally fired. I invited him to be my guest at the State of the Union to highlight that, and we organized pushback, and ultimately some of those functions were returned. I'll give you another example. The Science Committee, the administration is not telling us anything. So we opened a portal on the Democratic side and invited scientists who had been impacted to directly tell us what had happened to them. I organized a little set of speeches on the House floor, and each one of the Democratic members took something that had come into us from the portal, and I got to go first since I'm the lead Democrat. Really? You fired the Ebola scientists? That's the question I asked. They didn't even know they'd fired the Ebola. They hired them back. So we have a multi-faceted effort to defeat them, but in the end, defeating them is going to be up to you, taking power away from them next year in the midterm elections.
Yeah, look, I obviously echo what Zoe Lofgren said, what Zoe said in regards to that. Obviously, like I talked about, we can only file so much litigation like, the Power of the Purse Act, which will rein in spending abuses of this administration, and the Securing Assurance for Federal Employees Act, which basically tells Russ Vought of the OMB, that Dr. Evil, or whatever you want to call this guy, whatever he likes to be called, to be honest with you, basically reigns in his power too. But when we're in the minority, we know, and you know, those bills won't go anywhere. When it comes to investigation, I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, one of the most powerful committees, as they say, as I like to say, and still a bipartisan committee, but our Republican colleagues aren't doing a damn thing when it comes to calling in these heads of cabinet to testify in front of us. Normally, we've had the HHS secretary come in. We've had the IRS director come in. We've had Treasury come in. Nobody's coming in, and we're demanding that we come in, and you bet we want to hear from Robert F. Kennedy and call him to the carpet as to the crap that he's doing when it comes to hurting our health care. But I think Zoe said something that I couldn't believe when one of my Republican colleagues told me this, and then when I heard from other people, that basically the way that they are doing these cuts is sort of just without any thinking about the implications of them. We actually had someone go into the White House, and he told me this, that they went in and said, how could you cut the funding for this very important program that basically makes sure that planes don't run into big birds at all of our airports across the country? Their response is, We're going to make these cuts no matter what, and then you're going to have to come in and convince us why we need to restore them. This is what they're doing. This is why we need to do everything we can to push back. Yes, with litigation, yes, with legislation and investigation, but as Zoe said, that takes being in the minority. Litigation has been our bulwark. The courts have been our bulwark when it comes to pushing back on this administration, when it comes to restoring people in these jobs. Now, in the 19th Congressional District, from South San Jose to Santa Cruz to Monterey to Northern San Luis Obispo, we have about 10,000 federal employees here. I've had roundtables. I had one last Friday, meeting with people and talking to them and hearing their concerns and basically letting me realize how I can be their voice back in Washington, D.C. But I'm telling you, you had Doge, and now you have these RIFs. Now, when you look at Doge, what happened? Basically, they came on strong. They made these ridiculous cuts. They got their asses kicked in the court, and now basically Elon Musk left government, thank God. And now, basically, they start to restore stuff. But why did they do that? Because they heard from Republicans. Those Republicans heard from their constituents. And unfortunately, that's what it's going to have to rely on going forward, at least for this next year and a half, or this next year up to 2026. We have to make sure that constituents in those red districts kick the crap out of the Republican members so that they need to push back on this White House. That's what's going to happen as we go forward, and we're going to continue to make sure we do it. Look, it really is about having the agency to push back. As Zoe said repeatedly, not just today, but in what we've been through in the past 9 months, what I've continued to say, it really is making sure that we win the House in 2026, to have that agency so that we can give Hakeem Jeffries the gavel, and that he and all of the Democrats can push back on this Republican House, Republican Senate, and then definitely push back on this Republican White House.
Yes.
Thank you both. All right. Many of the questions submitted for this town hall reflect extreme concern about the ongoing situation in Gaza, which many consider U.S.-supported genocide. Representative Panetta, polls show that 3/4 of Democrats oppose additional military aid to Israel. Please explain why you are accepting PAC money from pro-Israel groups and have voted to continue to support Israel by sending weapons.
Right now, and bear with me as I explain this, because I think we need to have a conversation about this. There are 213 Democrats in the House of Representatives, okay? Every Democratic member except 7 has taken donations from pro-Israel groups. That's 207 current members have taken money from pro-Israel groups. Now look, pro-Israel groups understandably support the security of Israel, especially since it's the only democracy in the Middle East. But I gotta tell you, a lot of members and a lot of Democrats don't do what I do with that money and don't do what Zoe does with that money. I give my money to Democrats so we can take back the House. I want to win, and I want to win back the House. Last year, I gave over $500,000 to Democrats and Democratic causes. This year, I'm going to give $750,000 to Democrats and Democratic causes. So please know that my donations, yes, they're for my campaign, but my donations are for all of us so that we can take back the House and actually start implementing things that push back on this president. Now, since October 7th of 2023, there's only been 7 votes dealing with the funding for Israel's defense. Okay, once again, since October 7th of 2023, there's only been 7 votes dealing with funding for Israel's defense. I voted no on 5 out of those 7 times of that funding, okay? Let me explain what that funding was. The first one was in November of 2023, a $26 billion package that the Republicans tried to shove through. 12 Democrats voted yes, I voted no. The next one, in February of 2024, a $26 billion package for defense mechanisms for Israel, dealing with Iron Dome and Iron Beam and procurement and operations. 46 Democrats voted yes. I voted no. There was a consolidated appropriations bill that then had the Iron Dome and missile defense systems. Every Democrat in the House of Representatives voted yes. Every Democrat. 58 Republicans voted no. And there were two then appropriations bills one in 2024 and one in 25. Basically, that had over $3 billion in funding for Israel defense. The first one was in June of 2024. I voted no. The second one in July of 2025, once again over $3 billion in appropriations for the defense of Israel. I voted no. Then there was this Israel Security Assistance Support Act in May of 2024 that would have forced the Biden administration to transfer bombs it didn't want to transfer. 16 Democrats voted for it. I voted no. Then there was the last bill, the seventh one, was the Israel Security Supplemental Bill. It's funding that also included Iron Dome support, but it also had humanitarian assistance. $3.4 million for migration and refugee assistance going right into Gaza, and $45.6 million for humanitarian assistance going right into Gaza. That bill passed in April of 2024 overwhelmingly, 366 to 58 no's. 173 Democrats voted yes, including myself and Congresswoman Lofgren. So look, the evidence, please look, I tell you this because I want you to look at the evidence. Please don't just look at my donations, look at what I do with those donations for Democrats. Don't just look at what I do on resolutions, look at what I do on the letters, on my statements, who I meet with, who I call, and please definitely look at how I vote. Thank you.
Representative Lofgren, given the historical injustice and abuse of Palestinian people by the State of Israel, how can we assure that Israel will respect the human rights of Palestinians going forward?
Well, let me just say that I was outraged by the attacks of October 7th, 2 years ago, and I've been deeply concerned by the tragedy in Gaza since that time. I recently co-sponsored several bills about the transfer of offensive weapons to Israel. I came to that conclusion after a lot of thought and prayer, because I do support the defense of Israel, and I support their right to exist. But I felt that was something I needed to do. And our friends here focus on us, but I would like to just point out that 3 resolutions that have been the focus of so much attention have not a single Republican co-sponsor. So please do consider where you are aiming your slings and arrows. I am hopeful. I mean, I think Donald Trump is the worst president in the history of the United States. But I am hopeful that we have a ceasefire only at this point. We don't have a plan for peace at all. People who support Israel cross the political spectrum. And one of the groups that has supported me is J Street, which is a group that supports the right of Israel, but supports the Palestinian people's right to their own two-state solution. What's happening now in the West Bank is going to make that almost impossible. So we need to speak out against what Israel is doing on the West Bank. We need to make sure that for a lasting peace, the Palestinian people have to have their own country. And that has always been America's former position. And so I am hopeful that as this unfolds, our current president will move beyond just a ceasefire, and I'm grateful for that, frankly, I am grateful for that, into something that will be an enduring peace, which has to involve the rights and the future and the dignity of the Palestinian people as well.
Lofgren. Representative Panetta, Representative Lofgren just mentioned co-sponsoring 3 resolutions in support of aid to Gaza. Why have you not co-sponsored these resolutions, and do you think it would help if you did?
Yeah, look, let me echo the sentiments of Congressman Lofgren again, in that what happened in Gaza and what's happening in Gaza is absolutely horrible, absolutely horrible. And that's why, basically, from the beginning of this year, I've said we need to stop the war, we need to release the hostages, we need to surge humanitarian aid, and that will be the foundation for a 2-state solution and hopefully everlasting peace in Israel. Now, and in the Middle East even. What we've seen, obviously, with this 20-point peace plan is there's a potential agreement for that first part. Let's hope that gets done, and let's hope it gets done quick. But we also have to continue to be negotiating for that second part when it comes to a 2-state solution, when it comes to overall peace in the region. That's why from early on in this year, especially when it comes to humanitarian aid and a number of other issues, I've been very, very active. Now, once again, let me continue to explain and give you the evidence to show what I've done, please, when it comes to this very, very horrible issue of what's happening in Gaza. In October of this month, I wrote and I'm leading a letter to Secretary Rubio to ensure that there are measures in which people stuck in Gaza can get expedited visas to get out of Gaza and get to this country. In September, I wrote to Prime Minister Netanyahu telling him that we were opposed to the annexation of the West Bank. In September of that same month, I wrote to Secretary Rubio urging him to engage with the Arab League, who recently put out a statement of their support for a 2-state solution. In September, I wrote a letter to the UN Secretary General that they need to deploy peacekeeping operations to Gaza so that the humanitarian aid can get into Gaza. In August, I again wrote Secretary Rubio to reverse his pause on medical humanitarian visas for children in Gaza. It was ridiculous. In August, I wrote to Secretary Rubio to facilitate an immediate and massive surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza, especially infant formula. Also in August, we wrote to the Israel Ambassador Leiter about the dire situation of the humanitarian aid not getting into Israel and demanded that Israel do everything it can to alleviate human suffering in Gaza. In July, I wrote to Secretary Rubio that we were concerned with this GHF, this Global Health Foundation that was delivering much of this food or not delivering it, and telling him that it needs to be reviewed and there has to be oversight and there has to be proper humanitarian assistance into Gaza ASAP. In July, I put out a formal statement saying that Israel has a responsibility to alleviate the catastrophe in Gaza with more humanitarian aid. In that statement, I talked about my personal phone call with Ambassador Leiter in which I demanded and directed him and begged him for more humanitarian aid into Gaza. 3 days later, on July 27th, Israel responded that they're going to up the humanitarian aid. In my statement, I said I appreciate that, but more needed to be done. In July, I put out a formal statement stating that the bloodshed around the GHF food distribution sites is absolutely unacceptable, and we need an immediate cessation of hostilities. In June, I did an interview on Meet the Press Now with Kristen Welker, in which I stated hostages need to be released, Hamas needs to be degraded, and President Trump needs to do everything he can to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. In June, I co-led an effort to provide $1.8 billion for the Food for Peace program. Much of that would go right into Gaza. Republicans, unfortunately, rejected that. In May, we made a formal statement saying that any humanitarian aid must be dispersed swiftly and safely to Gaza, and there must be a swift end to the war. In April, I made a formal statement and I called on Israel to prevent the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. In February, we wrote to President Trump and said, retract that stupid statement that you made about the Gaza being the Riviera of the Middle East. Uphold the ceasefire agreement and work towards a 2-state solution. I've traveled to the region twice this year, to the Middle East, where I met directly with leaders of the Arab countries, of the Gulf states, and demanded that they do more to get involved to fund humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. I was part of the first congressional delegation to go into Israel on October 10th, 2023, and I've been twice to Israel since that time in 2024. And in each of those subsequent occasions, I stressed to leadership, there must be more to be done when it comes to humanitarian aid, including Ro Khanna and myself sat there in Netanyahu's office and demanded that he bring more humanitarian aid into Israel. Look, I tell you this because I want to make sure that you look at the evidence and look at what I have done. Actually, things that I'm doing. And just because I support Israel doesn't mean I can't support and ask for and demand more humanitarian aid to Palestinians. And it sure as hell doesn't mean that I don't support peace. Please know that. That's why all of us need to make sure that this peace deal actually comes to fruition. We release the hostages, we get humanitarian aid in, and we have a two-state solution. Thank you.
Representative Lofgren. We're going to shift gears. While understanding the Republicans control the House, what pressure can you put on the Speaker of the House, Johnson, to swear in and seat elected House member from Arizona, Hilary? Can a federal judge administer the oath if Speaker Johnson? Can federal judges administer an oath if Speaker Johnson continues to refuse to do so? If so, how can you help make that happen?
Thank you for that question. That the Speaker has refused to swear in the newest member of the House from Arizona, who is succeeding her late father, Raul Grajal, a wonderful man who died earlier this year, is really outrageous. The process has been that if you are elected, and there's no question, she was elected by a landslide, so there was not any question about whether she was in fact elected. You accept that result, and he has repeatedly, both for Democrats and Republicans, sworn members in during these so-called pro forma sessions. In the Constitution, you have to meet every 3 days, unless you get permission from the other body, which would be the Senate. So we go in, gavel something in, and then you, well, he won't do that. Why is that? I think it's pretty clear. Epstein files have not been released. You know, when this was first discussed, I mean, like a couple of years ago, I thought, well, that must just be some wild conspiracy theory. Well, given the tremendous effort that Trump and his administration is doing to hide what's in those files, I think there's something pretty damaging there. We have a discharge petition. What that is, it's a process where the majority of the Congress signs this piece of paper. It's held at the front of the chambers. The bill is discharged, and it's a bipartisan bill. Our colleague Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massey, who is out there but is a man who believes in his principles. We're at 217. She's number 218. And as soon as she's sworn in, she's going to sign that petition. And it's too late to try and break the arms of the Republicans on that. And they're going to have to cast a vote on whether to force the release of those files. I'm on, and so is Jimmy. Every Democrat is on. Let me just say this. You can't get a federal judge. I mean, you can authorize a judge to do it, but that also takes action from the Speaker. Don't be confused that this is about anything other than hiding the corruption of the administration and the disgusting things that I'm now pretty convinced are in that Epstein file.
Let me just say, it's been fascinating to see the consternation that these Epstein files bring to our Republican colleagues. They don't know how to act on this thing. And early on when it came out, I'll never forget having a conversation with one of them where it brought absolute anger to him that we were forcing them to release the Epstein files. Yet I know that this is a Republican colleague that demanded the Epstein files came out under Biden. And now that Trump says he doesn't want them, they're completely shifting their take on this thing. And so and I think it's something, that's why, exactly why we're on a discharge petition. It's why Zoe and I are on this October 2nd letter that we sent to Speaker Johnson demanding that Ms. Grijalva be sworn in as a member of Congress in the pro forma session, just like Zoe explained there has been. These are some of the things that we have been doing, a couple of things that we will get doing, and trust me, she'll get sworn in, and that discharge petition will get released, and that's more ammunition that we can have to push back on this administration.
How frustrating for the people of Arizona. The following questions for both of you. We'll begin with Representative Panetta. What communications did you have with local law enforcement agencies about protecting residents of your district from ICE kidnapping?
Trump's deportation policy is absolutely putting fear into our communities, and we're seeing it right here, not just in Watsonville, but throughout the 19th Congressional District. It's harming our working families, and it absolutely is hurting our economy. And so that's why the first thing we did once Trump took the oath, we put out a Know Your Rights and Resources in Spanish and in English, and we basically dumped it out in the community. We've worked with our county supervisors in all 4 counties that I represent. I then met with local law enforcement from San Jose to Santa Cruz to Monterey to northern San Luis Obispo County to reinforce making sure that they understand SB 54, which is a state law which says that they cannot use police for resources to assist federal immigration enforcement. And I firmly believe that that's why this administration has tried to make a show of force, as they are, at least down south, when it comes to pushing back, when it comes to trying to inject themselves into our communities and these horrific and horrible ICE raids. But I also went beyond the district. 2 months ago, I visited the Adelanto Detention Facility in Victorville, California, and I spoke directly with ICE agents and Border Patrol agents and made sure that they were upholding due process. I visited an immigration court and wanted to observe the proceedings to make sure that due process was being implemented. Last month, I went to the border in Arizona, spoke with ICE agents, spoke with CBP agents to ensure that they are upholding due process as well. Legislatively, I introduced the Immigrant Witness and Victim Protection Act, which expands the number of U visas. U visas are something that I used as an attorney to ensure that people, domestic violence victims and other victims and witnesses to crime actually come forward and testify. Then they have a way of staying here legally. There's a cap on them. I want to take that cap off and allow those people to stay here. And then the best way we can do it is through casework. And look, we did that with Cleona Ward. Cleona Ward was an immigrant who had been here since the 80s. She got her green card. Now, yes, in the early 90s, she had to run in with the law with a possession of methamphetamine case. She did her time. She basically took the plea, took the diversion, and had that case expunged off her record at the state level. She then, this year, was going to visit her ailing father abroad, came back through SFO, and basically she gets picked up. And she gets put in detention facility all the way up in Washington, in Seattle, Washington. We worked with the DA down here. We worked with an amazing immigration attorney who I hope you know, Michael Mayer, who's an outstanding immigration attorney. I called ICE agents up there and made sure that she was being treated properly. We then got her case thrown out here. She got released, and I'm proud to say she's not only back in this community, now she wants to become a full-time citizen. That's the type of work we can do, and we need to continue to do to push back on this administration's horrible deportation policies.
Let me just thank Jimmy for mentioning the important work that our offices do helping individuals. My office in Salinas as well as in San Jose does that. And it's important on a one-by-one basis that we do our best to stand up for people. And so I would encourage anybody here, if you know someone who needs help, reach out to us and we will go to bat for you as best we can. But obviously, we need a broader answer to this. I am a former immigration lawyer. I'm a former immigration law professor. I'm the former chair of the Immigration Subcommittee in the Judiciary Committee, and I'm the second longest serving Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. And so I am hopeful that if we regain control of the House and, God willing, the Senate, that we'll have a chance to actually reform the immigration laws, because the people who are being picked up are otherwise law-abiding except for an immigration violation. I have a bill that's called the Registry Bill, and it really bootstraps on something that was first done in 1927 in the immigration law, which says if you've been here a long time and you have a clean record, you can step forward, register, and get your legal residence. That's been updated multiple times. The last time when Ronald Reagan was president. We need to do that. We've had, there's opinion across the spectrum on the Democratic side. We have a very broad coalition, unlike the Republicans. Hakeem Jeffries asked Pete Aguilar, our caucus chair, to convene kind of people across the spectrum of political views in the Democratic House to sort through what can we all agree on. We meet frequently, and I'm part of that group, partly because I'm part of the spectrum, but also I'm a former immigration law professor. What can we agree on? And there's vast agreement about the need to legalize people who are hardworking and contributing to our country, to stop the kind of outrageous behavior that we see now in the ICE activities. You know, the Judiciary Committee just sent a letter asking about Tom Homan. It's been widely reported, and he does not deny, that he received $50,000 in cash in a paper bag. Who does that innocently, really? The letter is posted on my website if you're interested in reading it. We'll see if they answer. But the entire scheme that they're engaging in is corrupt from top to bottom. One of the things that I've done is to work with our law enforcement agencies, usually discreetly, because I want them to act, and sometimes they can't act if somebody's berating them, another elected official, but to ask them to examine what opportunities they have to counter what ICE is doing. I represent parts of Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. Every one of those counties has established a policy of not working with ICE, of law enforcement not working with ICE, but I'm not sure that's enough. I was really baffled by the shadow docket decision to allow racial profiling by ICE just recently. But I'll just say, if one group in America doesn't have due process, nobody in America has due process. We all have to stand up for this reason. And the other thing I've been asking, and I would ask you to ask your own elected officials, ICE has a job to do, but the fact that they're a federal agent does not allow them to violate the criminal laws of the states that they're operating in. I was stunned to see in Chicago Black Hawk helicopters with ICE agents, apparently without a warrant, rappelling into an apartment building, breaking down doors, pulling people out of their homes, including, reportedly, children naked out onto the street and putting the children in handcuffs. I'm sorry, that is not lawful activity. And the question I have is, has the DA of Cook County convened a grand jury to examine that behavior? Is the Attorney General of Illinois taking a look at what needs to be done to hold people accountable for law violations? I've been asking that locally, and I would encourage all of you to ask your city councils, to ask your elected sheriffs, what are they going to do to protect people from unlawful activity engaged in by federal agents.
Next question for both of you. We'll start with Representative Lofgren. How will you stand up for people in the LGBTQI+ community, especially trans people, who are being targeted by this administration and are having their basic rights taken away from them?
Well, I'm someone who believes in equality. I don't think anybody should be treated unfairly because of who they are. I am a co-sponsor of the Equality Act. I'm a member of the Equality Caucus, and as a matter of fact, I'm on the board of the Equality Act Political Action Committee. So it's something that I believe in strongly. I think the Republicans have tried to marginalize individuals, and then by marginalizing them, marginalize Democrats. I think we have to stand up against that, all of us, not just the elected officials, and say, if you pick on that person, nobody is safe. It's the same with due process. You can't allow people to be shut to one side. Take a look at what happened in Germany in the 30s. It was one by one, people were marginalized until they were coming for everyone. So stand up for everyone, and I'll be with you.
Good. Thank you, Zoe. And obviously, since this administration's come into the helm, we've seen increased attacks on the LGBTQIA+ community, and especially the trans community, starting back in their campaign. And that's why we've got to continue to call it out for what it is, and that's flat-out discrimination. And they're continuing to attack these types of vulnerable communities. That's why I, too, am a member of the Equality Caucus. That's why I support the Equality Act that prevents discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender. It's why this week we wrote the letter to Speaker Johnson, led by Mark Decano, who leads the Equality Caucus, to basically condemn anti-trans language used by House Republicans and abide by the rules of decorum. It's why I'm also the author of the Armed Forces Transgender Dependent Protection Act, saying that the DoD cannot transfer military members who have family members to states where they don't allow gender-affirming care. It's why I voted no against the National Defense Authorization Act this year, the NDAA, because it had a provision in it to prevent transgender individuals from continuing to serve in our armed services. It also included a provision that forced all service members to use facilities based on their gender assigned at birth. It's exactly why I voted no. I too, as you heard, am on the Rapid Response Litigation Task Force, and on the legal front, we're continuing to push back on this administration, as we will continue to do going forward by joining amicus briefs supporting LGBTQIA+ causes, including a lawsuit against conversion therapy, or making sure that doesn't happen. And locally, obviously showing up, and tonight I'll be at the Diversity Gala, and I hope to see all of you.
We're going to our final questions so we can get you back out to your Saturday. And as we go to it, I'm going to go off script for a moment. There are a number of very, very, very young future voters sitting over in this section that I've been watching on their very best behavior. So I sure hope that you all go get to do something fun. With that, the question will start with Representative Panetta. Your constituents are concerned about authoritarianism, abuse of power, executive branch overreach, assaults on democracy, and numerous impeachable offenses committed by the president since he took office. There's also an alarming escalation of the administration's efforts to target Democrats, civil rights groups, and other peaceful organizations, including Indivisible, labeling them as the enemy within and domestic terrorist organizations. What actions are you and the Democratic Party taking to fight for the preservation of our democratic institutions and the people of our country?
The fear that we feel, that's within our community, it's within our congressional district, that's within our country, is a legitimate fear. Let's make that clear. And I believe it's all because of this one person in his administration in the White House. And it's crazy because our founding creators understood very well that one person rule is not just a mistake, it's very destructive. And we're seeing that right now as to what can happen when you have one person rule out of the White House that's governing by diktat. It leads to corruption. It leads to incompetence. And yes, it leads to cuts in health care. This is why, and people have asked, look, we have a system. Why is this happening when we have our checks and balances? And what you have to realize is that our Constitution was set up, and it's based on norms and precedents, unfortunately. And we've relied on those norms and precedents throughout the history of our country. And we didn't realize or expect that we'd have someone as destructive and dangerous as Donald Trump. That's why it's so important that we continue to push back on this Republican House, Republican Senate, and this White House. Because the reason why this administration is being allowed to be so destructive is because our system of checks and balances is at least faltering, especially when it comes to this weak Congress and Speaker Mike Johnson. They are capitulating, they are bending the knee, they are absolutely abdicating the role when it comes to being that separate entity, that Article 1 entity of the Constitution. But that's what Trump wants. He knows this. He knows his policies are unpopular. Why do you think he wants to change the name of the OBBB to something else? Because he knows people are starting to push back on that bill. Why do you think he went into Texas and basically said, give me 5, and then is going to Indiana and Missouri and Kansas and other states so that he can keep Congress the way it is? That's why Proposition 50 is so important. Let me tell you, I said from the very beginning that our goal is to make sure that we take back the House in 2026, that we give agency to the Democrats in the House of Representatives. I say that not just based on the obvious, I say that based on what happened back in 2018. Because look, a good friend of ours, Mike Thompson, we were waiting in line as we normally do to fly back here, and he said something to me that really resonated with me. He said, you know what? Speaker Pelosi always made the moment. Don't get me wrong, she was the most badass speaker I think I'll ever have in my lifetime, okay? But you also got to think about what it was like when we were in the majority from 2017 to 2019. And basically there were Democrats who wanted to challenge her, who ran against her. But let me tell you, once we gave her the gavel, that's when she made the moment. That's when she had agency to tear up the speech sitting behind Speaker Johnson, to walk out of that White House and put on those sunglasses, the badass as she is, to then stand across the cabinet table from the President Trump, and point at him and scold him like she did so amazingly. This is what we have to do in 2026, but it starts this November. It starts in 2025 with Proposition 50. That's why it's so important that we fight fire with fire in Proposition 50. We have to make sure that we get out the vote. As Representative Lofgren said, we are an independent redistricting commission state, and very proud of that. But man, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And this is one of those times. And this is why we have to vote yes on Prop 50. Look, we support independent redistricting commissions throughout the United States. It's why Zoe is one of the authors of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, to make sure that happens. But until then, we have to put up the fight. We're in that fight. We appreciate you being in that fight. And look, let me give you, I was watching the mayoral candidate in New York, Mondami, this week. And he gave a quote. He gave a quote, he was quoting the former mayor, Ed Koch. And he said, look, he said, if you agree with me 9 of 12 times, then we're good. If you agree with me 12 of 12 times, you need to get your head checked, okay? And I think, look, we're not going to agree on everything, okay? But we got to stay together on the fight against this administration. And let me tell you, a quote that Speaker Pelosi often uses and should resonate with all of us is that our diversity is our strength, but our unity is our power. Ladies and gentlemen, let's stay together, vote yes on Prop 50. That's how we push back on this administration.
I'll just add that I'm very concerned, and frankly, I'm worried about the future of our democracy. I was one of the impeachment managers for Trump's first impeachment. It was a very amazing experience. And we would make our case and then we'd take small breaks. And during the breaks, I would do two things. One, I would take the opportunity to lobby senators on the Farm Workforce Modernization Immigration Act. And two, I would try and find out where they were coming from. And after the whole trial was over, a number of Republican senators, who I knew, many of them I'd served with in the House, told me that we had made our case, but they would not vote to impeach him and remove him. After January 6th, it couldn't have been clearer what had happened. And it's worth remembering, he got 57 votes to be convicted in the Senate. I mean, that's a landslide, just not enough under the Constitution. So, as a member of the January 6th committee, I was able to see firsthand the depths to which this man would go. He summoned him on. Remember during the debate, he said, "Proud boys, stand by, but be ready." He summoned the mob to Washington, knowing they were armed, sent them to the Capitol to overthrow the government. Now, I think we don't appreciate our Capitol police officers sometimes as much as we should. I mean, they were brutally abused that day. But we are about 20 minutes away from the mob succeeding. They stopped that. But that didn't stop the risk that we face as a democracy, because Donald Trump's goal is to seize power no matter what means. And unfortunately, our Republican colleagues, with the exception of one, Thomas Massey, they're not willing to stand up publicly to him, although many of them understand what's going on, disagree, they will not stand up to him. And so I think we need to do a multitude of things. As Jimmy said, we have 3 branches of government. We need to have an aggressive litigation stance. That he is now calling the No King's Day and Antifa, violent action. What gives, really? We need to, aggressively get restraining orders against these guys. We need to go after them legally instead of just waiting for them to come after us, number 1. Number 2, we need to utilize the power that our states and localities have. I will say that our Attorney General Bont has been very aggressive. Our governor has been as well. We need to encourage them and to legally go after them to stop them from the abusive behavior that they have. But there is a role for citizens and Americans themselves, which is to not be afraid. That's what they want you to do. They want you to be afraid to speak. That's why they're threatening people. That's why they're bringing baseless indictments. Well, I, for one, am not going to be intimidated. I am not going to be bullied. And if we all stand together, I think we have hope to save our democracy, but only if we do it together. Thank you.